Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's time for AMA number 20. The year is 2020, the AMA is 20. Everything is kind of 20 except my age. I'm 24, too many people ask. I'm not 19. Nevertheless, if you have any questions, ask them in the YamatoCannon subreddit or the Discord or the Patreon. Let's jump into it, but before that, the spicy sauce, I got an update to when it arrives. I found this nice package of, I think, 9 different sauces or 7 that gradually become spicier. The last one being some Carolina Reaper business and so forth. So it will be a good fun. So just stay with me. Don't unsubscribe yet. First question. YamatoCannon asks, who would win MSI between T1, C9, JDG, and G2? So I put the question in myself because I need a quick clickbait title, you know? I think G2 would be my favorite coming into it. I know that G2, faced a Fnatic, and this Fnatic was so unprepared, so it's hard to judge. But I think this G2 has improved a lot since last year. I think they play better as a team. They have improved their early game massively, and I think they are much more cohesive than they've ever been. And I think Caps has very, very high highs on the AD carry position. And I think, in consideration to the swap, I don't know if Perkz would be as good of an AD carry as he was last year, because he mastered really Xayah, Kaiser, and a lot of the APs. Perkz, to me, was one of the best players at the World Championship by far. You guys saw my tier list. I put him, I think, second. Perkz was super up there. And I think, coming into this split, for a lot of AD carries, there was a lot of adaptation that needed to be done, and Caps grew into the role. And I think a lot of bad moments stood out to us, but those are, moments that he had on mid lane too. But it was just easier for G2 to cover those up. And I think, the games that stood up was the series against Mad Lions, where he just died clearing mid-wave over and over. And also, of course, against Misfits, where he, ran it down on Aphelios. But beyond that, I think he had a splendid performance. In contrast to the other teams, I think G2's performance would increase as they would practice against the Eastern teams. I think, if they would have to bootcamp in Europe and every team would have to bootcamp in the respective region, I think then G2 would come in at a slight disadvantage, but then they would have to learn as much as possible throughout the group stage and then continue on to the best of fives, which is something that G2 definitely can do. I think G2 just needs to bootcamp and practice against Chinese teams and Korean teams and not against European teams like they did at the World Championship. T1, I think they looked solid. I think they had better understanding of draft in comparison to Gen.G. I think that victory was very similar to the victory of G2. I think Gen.G, honestly, I think BDD and Clid just hard choke every time they play against T1, so it's hard to take a lot away from that one. I think T1 against DRX was a better series in the finals. I think T1 tend to wait too much. I think a best of 5 between G2 and T1 would look similar to what they did last year, in the sense that T1 are still very, very slow on pulling the trigger because they rely on their composition to win out for them. And I think Gen.G had opportunities to punish that slowness. C9, I think their team play is really, really good. I think C9's team play is really, really good. I still think, I don't know if they were hiding things or they just didn't feel like it was necessary, but you could clearly see the difference between C9's drafting and JDG, G2, and T1's drafting. The meta assessment, I think the JDG, G2, and T1 has kind of a theme that they are kind of looking for picks that balance and bridge them to that point in time where they are going to outscale the enemy. And I think this is what we saw in all of the finals, except the one where C9 played, where C9 kind of did whatever they wanted. And I don't blame C9 for that, because C9 have very little competition too. But my worry when it comes to C9 is that I still, even though their team play is insane, it's just hard for me to imagine a world where they grow so much individually that all of a sudden they're going to compete with the best of the best. Licorice struggled against some of the better top laners. Niski struggled against some of the better mid laners. Sven and Vulcan are looking strong, but still, who knows? Same for the jungle position. It's just individually, it's hard for me to imagine where they match up against, the best of the best. But this is something that, maybe C9 have the same issue as G2. They just have bad practice. But team-wise, I think C9 play super well together. But I would rate them 4th out of the top 4 teams out of the major regions. And this is how I conclude them. I don't have any information on the smaller regions, so forgive me. But I would put G2 as the favorite because I think they are the most well-rounded team. JDG, I think Yagao has champion pool issues. I think Lumao is super good. I think Lumao is really good. Zoom is really insane. I think Kanavi didn't have the best finals, honestly. I think in regular season he was absolutely crazy, and Zoom and Kanavi are definitely one of the best players in their own position. I just not a believer in Yagao. I think Loken is also really good. Yagao would be a problem for me. I think he was a problem in the series against Top Esports, and there was a world where Top Esports actually wins that series. It was very close. So G2 would be my favorite. I'm looking forward to that one guy who hates G2 to comment, oh, G2 bias. Who cares? The Max Mist asks, what are your thoughts on FPX switching between Khan and Gimgoon? At times I thought it worked, while other times it showed flaws. I'm curious what you think since we've seen both in playoffs now. It's kind of weird because they're trying to shoehorn Khan into a position where, like, when Khan is in the game, they play for Khan. They let him play the very lane individual champions, while in reality Khan historically has been good at playing both ways. I think every time Khan has been subbed in, he has played super well. I think Khan using him as a weapon specifically against the Shy is something that proved very effective, because Khan to me still is one of the best top laners in the world. I think last year I think he was the second best top laner. I think Wunder was Wunder honestly was the better top laner best of 5, so it's hard for me to put Khan over him. That's unfair. But Khan was definitely up there, right? He was definitely up there, the Shy being first, and I think Khan is the better top laner than Gimgoon, but it seems like FPX have the opinion that Khan is less of a team player than Gimgoon is, and Gimgoon is willing to play the position where he plays weak side. Because it's weird, always when Khan gets subbed in, they play into top quite heavily, and they're playing for Khan, especially we saw it in the early season where he was like dancing on teams with Fiora. But it was a meta where everything was heavily revolved around bot lane. There was a lot of Ornn, and this is where, Gimgoon fits better with the GP and the Ornn and so forth. But I have no doubt in my mind that Khan can play this too. So I think it's just FBX choosing to commit to a style and making sure that each of these players are playing a specific style. But I think Khan is well-rounded enough to play both. I think Gimgoon can also play both, but I think Khan individually is better. Gimgoon seems to, mesh with the team better, but it just seems like a choice from FPX more than anything else, because I have Khan very highly in my regards. HLGS1 asks, what would be your dream roster to challenge G2 and Fnatic if you were a coach with players of your choice for Season 11? So, obviously, this is... I'm going to stick to Europe, okay? I'm going to stick to Europe because I think if I go abroad, it gets too easy, too fast. If I have a roster of, I don't know, I take Zoom with the Shy, with Kanavi, Rookie, Knight. It's gets dirty pretty quick, Jackie Love, Lumao. It's that becomes easy, yeah. So let's stick to Europe. Europe, I would put Alphari. That's an easy choice. Alphari is a solid choice. I would put Jizuki in mid lane, because it's a tough task already. It's a really tough task already. So you need something with shock value, right? You need something that has very high highs, but sometimes low lows, because you're not going to beat these teams being, average. You need to have a player that is capable of having a very fantastic performance that matches or surpasses a Perks, for example, right? And then you need, I guess, naturally you go Karzi and Kaiser in the bot lane. I think they are the third best bot lane in Europe, and I think this is the natural choice. I think they can progress and become a lot better. And then finally jungle. I guess jungle would be the most difficult one. Very, very difficult choice here, because I think Selfmade and Jankos are clearly above the rest. Clearly above the rest. And if I look at, you know, for example, Tinks is looking quite good in EU Masters. That's the name that crosses my mind. I'm just trying to think of a player that might have a high enough ceiling to surpass. And in Europe right now, it's hard for me to imagine, at least from the players that are in the LEC. So, jungle, I jungle. Okay, I jungle. 5 Milo, what do you think teams like Schalke or Vitality need to do during off-season? Just practice more or roster staff changes? I think Schalke was on a good path, right? They were on a good path. They definitely improved. They seemed to play better online than they did offline. They figured out the roster. They were on a good path. Vitality was not on a good path at all, right? They need to figure out their visa issues, and then they need to re-inspire their players. I think they need to commit to a 5 that works instead of swapping support every game. That's just too difficult for a AD carry to follow along with, in my opinion, unless you have like an extra AD carry, you have a bigger bench. The approach definitely needs to change. I don't know what, because we don't know the inside workings, but only a madman, you know, tries the same thing over and over and expects a different result. So you need to make changes, whether it is in the system or it is a dynamic change, meaning changing a player or a coaching staff. Something just needs to be different. I think from outside it's very difficult to point fingers. From inside it always is much easier, but change needs to happen. That's something that I can say for sure. Syntemis asks, hi Amaro, if you could change the seeding qualification requirements and tournament bracket format for Worlds in any way you wanted to improve it, would you change it? And if so, how would you change it? I just want double elimination. We get robbed of a lot of great potential comeback stories. I think IG versus KT 2018 was the true final that went to 5 games. I would love to see that best of 5 once again. This was, you know, prime Smeb against prime Deshai. There was prime KT. It was just a best of 5 that we got robbed of. When we think back, I'm sure you guys have more examples in mind where there are matchups that could have been if there was a double elimination bracket, and that's just what I want. I want more best of 5s, and I think it suits, especially after after quarters. There's seldom teams that you don't want to be there, you know, especially coming into next year, considering there's going to be 4 LPL teams, 1 in every group. I think chances are they will all go out of groups, and you just know that quarters are gonna be absolutely bloody. You know, they're gonna be crazy good. Some European teams, or LPL teams, or what's it called? Korean teams, LPL teams, or European teams. There's gonna be some teams that don't get through, and it's just getting harder and harder for NA teams to get through to the quarterfinals. I just want double elimination, shorty put, man. Just want double elimination, and I want heavy weight on summer instead of course, spring, because I think teams that are shit in summer don't belong at the World Championship. PTO the Mo Food, who would be in the best roster of all time from LEC? Well, considering how I spoke about G2 is the easy one. Sauron Squidmain, do you think Xmithie to TSM is possible? If so, how would TSM do as a team in summer split? I think, of course, it's possible, because, yeah, it's possible. Like, it's not impossible. Would it happen? I doubt it. I think Xmithie has reached his ceiling as a player, and even though Xmithie is smart about the game, he shot calls and so forth, you're at a point in time where if your ambitions are greater than to get to playoffs, then you can't have role players, meaning, oh, this is a player that brings the shot calling, his mechanics are trash. It doesn't really work that way. Right now, the best of the best are well-rounded. For example, now, Jankos in his form, if we compare Jankos to Xmithie, Jankos takes decisions, he shot calls about how he needs to play the early game, he plays well mechanically, plays all champions. It's hard to pinpoint, oh, this is his weakness, he has shit mechanics. No, it just doesn't work any longer, I think, if you want to compete to be the best of the best. And that, I think, should be in TSM's aspirations, but I don't know. Maybe Xmithie would be an improvement over Dardoch because TSM tend to play the game well the first 5 minutes, and then afterwards it's kind of like, what the hell is happening? You know? First 5 minutes, super good, and then just it falls flat. Many times, TSM, the trend was first 5 minutes was super good, and then they just don't know how to transition the pressure into other lanes and continue snowballing through lanes because their wave management is not the greatest. So I think TSM, player quality wise, is good now with Double Lift, Biofrost, and Broken Blade, and Bjergsen and Dardoch. I think player wise they are good, they have potential there. Hannigan asks, what are your thoughts on Griffin getting relegated from the LCK? Do you think the Griffin players are worth being picked up by other teams? I think Viper, Tarzan for sure are gonna get picked up. These are very big names. I think in general, I don't think anyone's judging Griffin individually by the performance of this year, because everyone knows that the Griffin situation is quite poor, and everyone knows that these are players that have high potential. I think the support player also, Irov, is also high potential player. That is an interesting prospect. I think UCal as well, you know, he has a very specific champion pool that can work sometimes, and I think also he can do a lot better than he did this year. I just think you know, it's a tough situation. You know, it's a very tough situation. They have two Ornn players, Untara and Sword. It's also funny, but I honestly, if you ask my thoughts, the whole situation with CB Max, I'm kind of happy that Griffin is out. This decreases the chances of getting into the Korean franchise system as well. So honestly, bye Griffin. I don't think twice about it, man. I think this team was completely the lifeblood of this team was CB Max and the players, and I couldn't care less about the branding or the team. If they had a different name or other, they were called YamatoCannons or whatever, it wouldn't make a difference because they were the lifeblood, and they killed and poisoned their own blood through the inner workings of the organization. For those who don't know, just Google it. There's been, you know, people can go through that thing way better than I can. Elefante, why do you think that the LPL has had so much success recently? Well, they have the most money, they have the bigger player base, they have the biggest fan base, they have the best organizational situation, meaning that, you know, the structure and the teams that are supporting the players has finally caught up to all the other things, meaning it has finally caught up to the money and all that jazz. So that's amazing, right? For the first time, you know, in the past, the horror stories you heard from China were absolutely crazy. There was, I remember, I don't want to mention names, but I remember there was a Korean player that insisted on bathing in Avion water because he didn't want to bathe in any other water. So there was like a guy hired to just pour Avion bottles into like a tank that would heat the water. And like absurd situations where the players were just out of control, you know, they were rock stars. And you know, it's cool to be a rock star and all, but that lifestyle doesn't really translate well when you want to compete against the best of the best. So it was that the rock star lifestyle has been toned down. Sure, it's still there because the money is there, of course, but the professionalism is added, the structure and the coaching is there, and they found like a neat balance where the players are allowed to express themselves and they are working very hard to compete. You know, a lot of teams in the LPL have a roster of 10 to 20 players. Honestly, they have lists of mechanically talented players that are just gonna, you know, compete for the positions and are just waiting to, you know, rock and roll on the Rift. This is a massive advantage, so we should really enjoy ourselves when we have the outliers from the other regions that are able to compete, because everything is pointing towards the direction of LPL being the winner of the World Championship if you look at the logistics of things. Ray of Darkness, is it possible to climb to high elo if you have a lot of game knowledge, even if your reaction time is suboptimal? Yeah, you can play champions that don't require mechanics. You can play the famous LS Annie. You can play the famous Bwipo Malphite. You can play Maokai. You can play Braum. You can play Blitzcrank. You can play things that don't require that many mechanics. You know, Blitzcrank maybe requires a little bit, but you know, there are champions that are there for you. Out of the past 2 World Finals, which trio was more of a shocker, 2018 and 2019? I think 2019 was definitely closer than 2018. I think 2018, honestly, IG showed a whole nother level, and it was very obvious to me that IG versus KT was the true final back then. 2019, like G2 beat so many teams on their path to the finals, and FPX looked quite silly in the groups, but you know, in hindsight, maybe it's easy to say that you know, the early game of FPX was too good for G2 to handle, because this was a weakness of theirs and they got away with a lot. But a part of me was hoping that G2 would adapt to FPX the same way they adapted to SKT and the same way they adapted to Damwon, because this is what they actually did. You know, Wunder was playing only Jace against Damwon, and that was perfect because he played Kayle and Vladimir, and Jace just wins against both, and he could hold his own, and Nuguri was nullified. And against SKT, they just drafted a way where they scaled better than SK Telecom, and no matter what happened in the early game, they would always reach that point in the game where they would be better off. And then against FPX, it's all about managing 2v2 mid, and the moment they locked in Pyke, I thought it would be like a Pyke top, and they roam with Pyke top. Like Pyke, who cares if you gank top with Nautilus, right? Pyke top can just impact mid and you give up top. And I thought this was the plan. I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then the Pyke went mid. I was like, what? What are they smoking? And then I thought Pyke is going to give up mid and roam top and be ahead of every play because he moves faster than Nautilus. But then they realized that Pyke can't really face check anything because Lee and Nautilus can just one-shot him. So it was quite silly, you know, and I think everything caught up to them. And I think that was a shocker. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that was it for this AMA. Pay attention to the next one. 21-21-21 is going to be the one where we eat spicy things, I hope. Fingers crossed. If you have any questions, ask them on the YamatoCannon subreddit, or of course the Discord or the Patreon. I wish you all the best. I hope I can share some good news with you soon. I'm hoping the visa people pop off.